The beacon had been floating in the dark for 40,000 years. No ship had passed close enough to hear it. No civilization had thought to look this far out, into the thin edge of the spiral arm, where stars grew sparse, and the silence between them stretched like something broken. It just pulsed, patient, waiting for someone to make the mistake of listening. Fleet Commander Sereth Voss, of the Vreth Imperial 9th Expansion Fleet, heard it on a Tuesday, which meant nothing to him, because the Vreth did not have Tuesdays. What they had was a log entry, time-stamped, filed by a scout drone that had been doing its job while Sereth Voss ate his morning meal and thought about legacy. He was thinking about legacy a lot lately. He was 53 years into his military career. He had taken 11 systems for the Vreth Empire. 11 stars with their rings of planets, their frightened populations, their small defenses that crumbled the way small defenses always did when the 9th Fleet arrived. 11 entries in the Imperial record with his name attached. He wanted a 12th. He wanted it to be clean and fast and large enough that his name would sit in the record for 1,000 years without anyone needing to blow the dust off it. So when the drone flagged the anomaly, he almost didn't read it. But the word beacon caught his eye. Beacons meant someone had been here. Someone had thought this empty corner of space was worth marking. And anything worth marking was worth examining, because marked things had value, and Sereth Voss had spent 53 years collecting valuable things. He pulled up the file. The object was small, the size of a ground vehicle from one of the primitive worlds his fleet had passed through in the outer territories. It was made of something dense and dark, not any alloy the fleet's sensors recognized. It had no weapons, no propulsion, nothing except a transmitter, still running on a power source that the engineers could not identify, broadcasting on a frequency so old that the 9th Fleet's communication systems had flagged it as background noise for 3 full days before the scout drone was calibrated correctly. The broadcast was a message. Sereth Voss called his translation team. It took them 3 hours. The language was not Vreth. It was not any living language. It was something older, something the cultural historians in the fleet database identified as a galactic pidgin used before the modern era, when many civilizations were still young and still thought talking to each other was a good idea. The translation came back. Sereth Voss read it once. Then he read it again. To any civilization capable of receiving this transmission, do not engage the species native to the 3rd planet of this system. We gave them a chance to yield. We assumed they would choose survival. We were wrong about what they consider worth surviving for. The Keth Collective. Below the signature, a status notation that his database had auto-filled. Keth Collective. Civilization status, extinct. Sereth Voss set the translation down on his desk. He looked at it for a moment, the way a person looks at a piece of old furniture they are deciding whether to keep or throw away. Then he looked out the long viewport of his command deck, at the stars ahead, and among them, visible as a faint warm dot, a yellow star with a system of planets circling it. 3rd planet. 3rd planet from that star. He checked the scout data. Atmosphere, water, life, a civilization of some kind. The drones would tell him more soon. The kind of system the Empire had absorbed 11 times before. He picked up the translation again, read the last line one more time. We assumed they would choose survival. We were wrong about what they consider worth surviving for. He decided it was interesting. An old civilization, clearly not very capable, had found these people and been afraid of them. Had been afraid enough to leave a warning. Had been afraid enough that their last act before disappearing from history was to tell strangers to stay away. He found that more amusing than anything else. Voss was standing near the door. His second-in-command had been with him for 9 years, and Sereth Voss had learned to notice when Voss was trying to say something without actually saying it. The man had a particular way of holding himself when he was thinking carefully, a slight stillness, the way a lake goes still before weather arrives. Foz was very still right now. "Say it," Sareth Voss said. "I was wondering," Foz said, "if it might be useful to investigate how the Keth went extinct, before we proceed." Sareth Voss looked at him. Foz met his eyes, did not look away. That was the thing about Foz. He always held his ground, not in a challenging way, in the way that a person holds their ground when they believe they are standing on something solid. "The Keth went extinct 40,000 years ago," Sareth Voss said. "Whatever ended them, it is over." "Yes," Foz said, "I know." Sareth Voss waited for him to continue. Foz did not continue. "Log the beacon as a cultural artifact," Sareth Voss said. "Have the engineers take a sample of the material for research. Then, plot our course for the third planet." "Yes, Commander." Foz left. Sareth Voss stayed at his desk and did not look at the beacon translation again. He ordered it filed, not deleted, because he was not a careless man. Careless men did not last 53 years in the Imperial military. He kept records. He kept data. He was organized and thorough and careful. He was just not worried. That was the difference. That was the thing that mattered. He had stood on the bridge of his fleet and watched 11 civilizations look up at his ships and make the same calculation that all civilizations make when something much larger arrives at their door. The calculation was always the same. It ran on the same logic, the same math, the same basic survival instinct that every species with a brain eventually develops. It said, the cost of fighting is too high. The cost of yielding is surviving. Choose survival. Every civilization made that calculation. Some made it fast, some made it slowly. Some needed a demonstration before the math became clear to them. But they all made it. The Keth had found a people who didn't. He told himself it was because the Keth were weak. Old, frightened, limited. They had met this species and been scared, the way limited things were scared of things they didn't understand. And then they had died for some unrelated reason. Disease, internal collapse, resource failure, any of the 100 ways a civilization could quietly stop existing, and left behind a warning that was really just a confession of their own smallness. He set course for the third planet. Behind the fleet, the beacon kept pulsing on its dead frequency. Patient, still waiting for someone to listen. The colony on Mara's Rest had been there for 60 years. It didn't look like much from orbit. The scout drone sent back images of terraced farmland cut into the hillsides, water channels running between rows of crops, a cluster of low buildings near the valley floor, a single defense station on the northern ridge that a mid-sized patrol cruiser could have handled alone. The population count came back at 412,000, most of them farmers, some of them teachers, engineers, doctors, a community that had spent 6 decades turning a raw planet into something livable and was still in the middle of that work. Sareth Voss looked at the drone images for 4 minutes. Then he called his communications officer and had her open a broadcast channel to the colony's primary frequency. He had done this 11 times before. He had the words memorized. Not because he had studied them, but because he had said them so many times, they had worn grooves into his mind, the way water wears grooves into rock. He spoke clearly and without hurry, because men who speak clearly and without hurry are understood as men who have no reason to be afraid. He told them who he was. He told them who the Vreth Empire was. He told them what the Empire required: surrender of all infrastructure, acceptance of Vreth governance, registration of the population for labor and resource classification. He told them they had 6 hours to comply, and that compliance would be met with integration rather than destruction, which was, in his experience, a word that made populations feel better, even when the practical difference was small. He told them that resistance was not a meaningful option. Then he waited. The response took 11 minutes. That was unusual. Most colony administrators responded within 2. Either they started negotiating immediately, or they started crying, or they started threatening. And all 3 of those things told Sarath Voss exactly where the conversation was going. 11 minutes of silence told him nothing, which was a feeling he found mildly irritating. When the channel opened, the man on the other end looked like someone who had been interrupted in the middle of ordinary work. He was older, round-faced, with the particular kind of tired that comes not from a bad night of sleep, but from decades of hard seasons. There was flour on his jacket. His name, the comm system told Sarath Voss, was Ferris Dahl, colony administrator, serving his 4th elected term. He looked into the camera for a moment, not with fear, not with defiance, with the expression of a man reading a very long document he had hoped he would never have to read. "I need to make a call first," Dahl said. Sarath Voss found this genuinely amusing. He would wait. He waited 11 minutes. The drone feed still showed the colony going about its day. People in the fields, a supply truck moving between buildings, children in what looked like a school courtyard, visible as small moving dots from altitude. The defense station on the northern ridge had powered up, which was understandable and irrelevant. When Dahl came back, his expression was different. It was hard to name the difference. He had been tired before. Now he was something else. Settled, maybe. The way a person looks after they have made a decision they do not like, but can live with. "Our answer is no," Dahl said. Sarath Voss waited for the rest. "We've also forwarded your fleet's coordinates and full energy signature to Earth Command. I've been asked to pass on a message." Dahl looked at something off-screen for a moment, then back at the camera. "They said to tell you, don't." There was no anger in his voice when he said it. No shaking. Nothing that suggested he believed the word would actually work. Just a man delivering a message he had been asked to deliver, clearly and without decoration, and then waiting to see what happened next. Sarath Voss closed the channel. He destroyed the defense station first. It took less than 40 seconds. Then the administrative center, because removing governance structures early made populations easier to manage. Then, because Ferris Dahl's expression had sat in his mind in a way he could not immediately explain to himself, he destroyed the residential tier. He told himself it was a demonstration, a message to Earth Command, whoever they were, about the cost of the word don't. He watched the drone feeds. The colony burned the way colonies burned, fast, then slower, then a long time of smoke and settling. Voss filed the incident report. Sarath Voss did not look at it. He already knew what it would say. It would say, "Defense station neutralized, administrative center neutralized, residential sections neutralized, population casualty count pending final drone survey." Numbers, clean and simple, the arithmetic of expansion. He did not look at the incident report. Somewhere in the drone footage, before the signal cut, there had been a sound. Not screaming. The comm system had picked it up from an open microphone somewhere in the residential tier, and played it for 3 seconds before the source was destroyed. A child's voice, not crying, singing something, a small, ordinary song. The kind of song that means nothing except that someone was small and happy, and did not know yet that the sky had changed. Voss logged it in the incident report under Miscellaneous Audio, Pre-Neutralization. Sarath Voss told himself the Keth had been a weak and frightened civilization. He told himself the warning they had left was the confession of small minds that did not understand the logic of empire. He told himself that Ferris Dahl's settled expression and the word don't and the 3 seconds of a child's voice were all part of the same thing, a primitive species making the wrong calculation. He set his fleet deeper into the system and began planning the next approach. He did not open the incident report. He would not open it. But he would remember the sound for the rest of his life. The way a person remembers a door closing behind them in a house they have just burned down, not understanding yet that they were the last one inside. Earth Command had received the coordinates. Earth Command had said don't. Sareth Voss had answered. Far away, around a planet called Earth, something very old and very quiet began to wake up. Not in a hurry, not in a panic, in the way that something wakes up when it has been waiting for a reason and has finally been given one. The ledger was open now. Sareth Voss had put the first number in it himself. The briefing room on Earth Command's Deep Space Operations Center had no windows. Admiral Yara Okonkwo Bell had always thought that was the right call. Windows gave you something to look at besides the problem in front of you. Windows let your eyes drift. She did not like drift. She liked attention on the thing that needed attention. And right now, the thing that needed attention was on the table in front of the Joint Council, in the form of a casualty report from a colony called Mara's Rest. She had read the report twice on her way to the briefing. She did not need to read it again. She stood at the head of the table and looked at the 12 faces of the Joint Council, and they looked back at her. And for a moment, no one said anything. The silence was the kind that happens not when people have nothing to say, but when the thing they need to say is so heavy that they are all waiting to see who will pick it up first. She picked it up. The Vreth Ninth Fleet is composed of 43 warships, she said. Their propulsion is faster than ours at standard cruise. Their shielding is stronger. Their long-range weapons have better range than ours by about 15%. She paused. We will take losses. The council waited. We will take all the losses we need to, she said. One of the council members, a man named Hartley, who had spent most of his career behind a desk, and had the particular softness of a person who has never had to hold a number that meant people, leaned forward. What does that mean exactly? What losses are we talking about? Okonkwo Bell looked at him. She had a scar on her left collarbone from a war that was 30 years old. An old piece of shrapnel, small, removed surgically a week after it arrived, but it had left a mark, and she had kept the mark because she thought it was useful to carry a thing like that. She touched it now. Left hand, 2 fingers. More than we want, she said. Fewer than they think. She did not explain further. She had learned over 40 years of command that some things lost their weight when you unpacked them. You left them packed. You let people feel the weight of the box without opening it. The vote took 7 minutes. It was not close. She left the briefing room and walked to the operations deck, where her staff was already working, already building the thing that needed to be built. She watched them for a moment from the doorway. Young people mostly, sharp and fast, and trained for exactly this. They moved around the room with the focused energy of people who understood that the next weeks would define the next generation. She went to her station and began building the fleet. 4 battle groups, 7 rapid response carriers, support ships, medical ships, supply lines, and the Remembrance, which had been sitting in dock for 20 years because no one had needed it badly enough, or maybe because everyone had hoped no one ever would. It was a dreadnought in the old style, built after the last major interstellar war, built by people who wanted to make sure that if it ever happened again, they would have an answer to it. It had sat in dock for 20 years, accumulating careful maintenance, and a name that everyone knew but nobody used much in conversation. She put it at the head of the formation. Every human colony in the Ninth Fleet's projected expansion corridor received a transmission that day. Just coordinates and a date. Be somewhere else by this date. No explanation. They wouldn't need one. The colonies were full of practical people who had been living on the edge of known space long enough to understand that when Earth Command said, be somewhere else, the correct response was to start moving and ask questions later. Her aide, a young man named Teres, found her at her desk late that night. He had the energy of someone who had been building up to a question for hours. "What terms will we accept?" he asked. "For a ceasefire? What's the minimum they can offer to make this stop?" Okonkwo Bell looked at him. He was 26 years old. He was very good at his job. He asked questions that needed to be asked, even when the answers were uncomfortable, which was why she kept him. She touched her collarbone. The briefing room had been full of data and projections and fleet analysis and casualty estimates. And all of it was real, and all of it mattered. But none of it was the thing she thought about when she thought about Mara's rest. She thought about Ferris Dahl. She had not known him personally. She had read his file. 4 terms as colony administrator. Born on Earth. Moved to the colony at 32. Spent the rest of his life there. He had been the kind of person a colony needed to function. Steady, practical, trusted by his neighbors. He had made a call to Earth Command and delivered their message, and then stayed on that planet while the sky came apart above him. She thought about the audio clip in the incident report. 3 seconds of a child singing. She thought about the fact that the Vreth commander had received the word, "Don't," and had answered by destroying 400,000 people. Not in a battle, not in a war they had started, in a demonstration. "Ask me after," she said. Terrace nodded. He wrote something in his tablet and left. She sat alone in her office for a while. Outside the station, past the hull and the empty dark, somewhere in the direction she could not see from here, the Ninth Fleet was still moving, still expanding. Still calculating the way Sereth Voss calculated, in the clean arithmetic of power and yield, in the logic that said the bigger thing always won because the bigger thing was always bigger. He did not understand the things she understood. She had learned it in 30 years of command, in wars small and large, in every briefing room where someone had asked about terms, and she had looked at the numbers and known that terms were not the point. Humans did not scale their response to the size of the threat. They scaled it to the debt. And the debt that had been opened at Mara's rest was one that she intended to close completely, finally, and in a way that left no possibility of a second invoice. She opened the fleet deployment map and got back to work. The Remembrance was already leaving dock. Its engines lit the dark like something being remembered. The battle began on a Thursday. It was called, afterward, the Battle of the Keth Corridor, because Admiral Okonkwo Bell had named the engagement zone herself, and she had chosen that name on purpose. And everyone who heard it understood why, and no one asked her to explain it. Sereth Voss had chosen his position well. He was not a poor commander. He had 43 warships arranged in a formation that his fleet's tactical AI had run through 900 simulations, and in 870 of those simulations, the formation held. He had read the human fleet composition data and concluded that he held the advantage in 3 critical areas: speed, shielding, and long-range fire. He intended to use all 3. The human fleet came out of faster-than-light transit in a pattern his tactical AI did not immediately recognize. It was not a standard attack formation. It was not a defensive formation. It was not anything his 900 simulations had modeled, because it was not organized around the logic his simulations used. Human fleets, the historical data told him, fought to preserve themselves. They protected their strongest ships. They kept reserves. They retreated when their losses reached a threshold that made continued engagement statistically unfavorable. The human fleet advanced on his center. All of it. No reserves held back. No flanking ships splitting off to safety. The entire formation, moving forward with the steadiness of something that had decided the distance between start and finish was just a formality. His long-range weapons opened up. They hit human ships. Human ships burned and broke. Some of them stopped functioning entirely. And the formation did not slow down. His tactical AI sent him a notification. Human unit cohesion does not degrade under casualties at expected rate. Recommend reassessment of threat parameters. He overrode it. He had been in 40 years of fleet engagements. He understood that early battle data was often misleading. He understood that formations that looked stable had breaking points, and that breaking points came with time and sustained pressure. He needed to be patient. He was patient. The human fleet kept coming. Ships died on both sides. The engagement was loud and fast and terrible in the way that battles at this scale were always terrible. A constant exchange of fire that turned pieces of space into brief, bright places and then left wreckage drifting in the dark. His fleet was taking damage. The humans were taking more. The math still said he was winning. The math kept saying that, while the remembrance turned. He saw it happen on his tactical display. The human dreadnought, which had been advancing with the main formation, pivoted 80 degrees and drove straight into the gap between his fleet's second and third lines. Not at a weapon system, not at a command ship, at the relay infrastructure that connected his fleet's communications network. The remembrance was not trying to win the battle, it was trying to make him deaf. It took 4 minutes and cost the dreadnought significant hull damage. But at the end of those 4 minutes, his second and third fleet lines were cut off from central command. Isolated ships, trying to reach him, getting silence. Isolated ship commanders, trained to fall back on protocol when cut off, now falling back on protocols that had been written for normal battles and were becoming useless very fast. Then every isolated ship began receiving the same transmission, on all frequencies, all channels, continuous. It was audio, 3 seconds long, playing on a loop. A child singing. He knew what audio it was. He had not opened the incident report from Mara's Rest, but Foz had, and Foz had told him about it weeks ago in a quiet voice, and he had told Foz it was irrelevant. It was not irrelevant now. It was playing inside the hulls of every cut-off Wraith ship, in every room and corridor and command deck. A child's voice going around and around, small and ordinary, singing a song that meant nothing except that someone had been alive and happy and had stopped being those things because Sareth Voss had decided to make a point. He watched his fleet's cohesion break. Not from casualties, not from damage. Ship commanders who had held their positions through the entire engagement began attempting to reach him on private channels, not to report, but to ask. Their voices had a quality he had not heard before in his career. The Vreth were not a species given to visible fear. They processed fear in their own way, managed it, contained it, but the voices coming through to him now were uncontained. The human fleet was not retreating. It was not slowing. And inside the hulls of his isolated ships, a dead child's voice was going around and would not stop. His flagship was still intact. His personal formation was still holding. He still had options. He opened a channel to the remembrance. He did not enjoy what he was about to do. He had spent 53 years building a record that did not include the word yield. But he was not a man who threw away what could be saved for the sake of his own stubbornness. He was calculating. That was what made him good. That was what made him last. Okonkwo Bell appeared on his screen. She was at her command station. She looked calm in the way that very still water looks calm, which is to say, the depth was doing the real work. He stated his rank. He announced that he was willing to discuss terms. He used the word terms because it was the professional word. It was the word that turned a defeat into a negotiation, and a negotiation into something both sides could walk away from. He had watched civilizations use it. He had accepted it from them. It was the word that said, "We are done fighting. Let us talk like people who will exist tomorrow." Okonkwo Bell looked at him. Her left hand moved to her collarbone. She held it there for a moment. Then she closed the channel. The battle continued for another 6 hours. At the end of it, there was no Ninth Fleet. There were individual ships scattered across a large area of space, some still functional, some not. All of them broadcasting surrender protocols now, all of them trying to reach a fleet command that was no longer there. Serath Voss was still alive. His flagship was heavily damaged, but intact. He sat in his command chair and looked at the tactical display and understood, with the clarity that comes at the end of things, what the Keth Collective had known 40,000 years ago. The warning had not been about how humans fought. It had been about what they decided before the fighting started. Once they had decided, once the number was fixed in their minds, the full cost they were willing to pay, there was nothing left to negotiate. Terms meant nothing. Retreat meant nothing. The word "don't" had been the offer. The only offer there would ever be. He had answered it. In the corner of his command screen, minimized, untouched since he had filed it weeks ago, the beacon translation sat in its small window. We assumed they would choose survival. The child's voice had stopped playing through the fleet channels. The silence it left behind was much louder. Then Sora had been 22 years old when she survived. She had been aboard a medical ship, the Kel Mora, positioned at the back of the fleet because medical ships went at the back and nobody thought to shoot at them first. When the battle turned and the fleet broke apart and the human forces began the final sweep, the Kel Mora was moving before anyone gave the order. Its captain did not wait for permission from a fleet command that had already stopped answering. He turned the ship and ran, and did not stop running until they were 3 systems away, and the sensors showed nothing following them. They were the only ship that made it out clean. The humans let them go. She had spent 40 years thinking about that. They had the range, they had the speed. They could have caught the Kel Mora in under an hour. They had chosen not to. She did not know if it was policy or mercy, or simply the fact that a medical ship was not worth the energy. It did not matter. She was alive because of it. She had tried at various points in her life to feel grateful for that, and had mostly managed it, though gratitude was complicated when you were the last person at a table that used to seat a civilization. The Vreth Empire did not end the way empires usually end, with conquest and occupation and the slow business of being absorbed into something larger. It ended quickly. The infrastructure had been too dependent on the fleet. The fleet was gone. The colonial systems it held together began to separate almost immediately, reverting to local governance, cutting ties that had been maintained by the threat of Vreth military response, and were meaningless without it. The home system lasted a few decades longer, but it was already hollowed out by the time it acknowledged, formally and quietly, that the empire was a historical term now, and not a present fact. Then Sora watched all of it from a distance, because she had spent 40 years becoming something she had not planned to become, the Vreth historian, the one who wrote it down, the one who talked to the survivors of those last colonial worlds, gathered their testimony, cross-referenced it with human records that Earth Command had made public, and built out of all of that a record of what had happened and how. She was 62 now, and she was in a small ship in the coordinates she had requested from Earth Command after a long correspondence and a background check that had taken 8 months. Earth Command had been cautious. She understood that. She had eventually convinced them that she was not a threat, just a historian, just an old woman trying to complete a record, and they had given her the coordinates and a safe passage notice, and she had come out here to the thin edge of the spiral arm where 2 beacons floated in the dark. The Keth beacon, 40,000 years old, and beside it, newly placed, the human beacon. Earth Command had built it 3 years after the battle. Same frequency as the Keth one, same design style, deliberately. The kind of choice that said, we know our history. We are adding to it. We know what this means. She opened her recording equipment and began to speak. She had written versions of this testimony many times. She had practiced it. She had thought she knew what she wanted to say. But sitting here in front of both beacons, with the thin light of distant stars and the vast quiet around her, The practiced version felt wrong. Too clean. The thing she actually needed to say was not organized. She started over. "We received a warning," she said. The fleet commander read it and found it interesting. He kept it filed. He did not take it seriously because the people who left it were gone, and he believed that meant the warning was about their weakness and not about something real. She stopped, thought. Colony Administrator Ferris Dahl transmitted one word to our fleet. The word was, "Don't." I have spent 40 years trying to explain what that word meant when a human said it. It did not mean, "Please." It did not mean, "We are frightened." It meant that they had already calculated the cost of what would happen next. They were telling us the cost. They were giving us one chance to hear it. She stopped again. Outside the viewport, the two beacons pulsed in unison on their dead frequency. "We did not hear it," she said. "We heard a word from a colony administrator in a flower-covered jacket, and we decided it was nothing. We heard 400,000 people described in an incident report, and we decided it was a demonstration. We heard a child singing in a piece of audio, and someone logged it as miscellaneous, and we did not open the file." Her voice was steady. She had cried about this many times over 40 years, and she had nothing left for crying right now. What she had left was the words, and she was going to put them in the record correctly. The Keth said they assumed we would choose survival. That is the same assumption we made about humanity. Every expanding empire makes that assumption because it is a logical assumption. It is the assumption that comes from understanding that life wants to continue, that survival is the first calculation any species makes, that the cost of resistance against a larger force is almost always higher than the cost of yielding. She looked at the Keth beacon. Humans do not make that calculation first. They make a different one. They calculate the debt, what has been taken, what it costs to close the account completely. And once that number is fixed in their minds, it does not change. There are no terms that change it. There is no retreat that changes it. There is only the debt and the closing of the debt, and they will pay whatever they need to pay on their side of it to make that happen. She paused for a long time. We opened the account. We could have not opened it. We were told not to open it. We opened it anyway, because we were large and they were small, and we believed that size was the thing that mattered. Outside, the beacons pulsed. "It is not the thing that matters," she said. She ended the recording. She packaged it carefully. The testimony and the full historical record, 40 years of documentation, every interview and cross-reference and piece of recovered data. She transmitted it to Earth Command's historical archive, as she had agreed, so that it would be kept properly and not lost. Then she loaded a copy into the new beacon's storage, alongside whatever was already inside it. 2 beacons, 2 records, same place, same frequency, same message, 40,000 years apart, dressed in different words and the same meaning. Somewhere else, on a planet that had been a colony and was now a town, Admiral Yara Okonkwo Bell was walking through a field of new crops. She was 71. She came back to Mara's Rest sometimes. Not often, but sometimes, because she thought it was important to come back. The town that had been built on the old site was not the same as the colony that had been there before. It was new, and the people in it were new. Many of them children who had been born after all of it, who knew the story as history and not as something that had happened in their own sky. The crops were tall this season. Someone had planted something that grew dense and green along the lower terraces. She walked between the rows and felt the leaves brush her hands and looked at the sky, which was clear and ordinary, and said nothing. A young officer from the local garrison found her there. He had been looking for her for an hour. He fell into step beside her and was quiet for a moment, because he had the sense to understand she was in the middle of something. And then he asked the question that people always eventually asked her. "What do you think about," he said, "when you come here?" She looked at the crops, at the terraces cut into the hillside, the same terraces that had been there before, rebuilt along the same lines, because this was good land and practical people used good land practically. "Whether we got it right," she said. The officer waited. The answer clearly needed more. She did not give it more. She did not know if they had gotten it right. She knew they had closed the account. She knew there were 400,000 names on a memorial in the center of town, carved in a stone that had been brought from Earth specifically for this purpose, and that none of those names had asked for what happened to them, or had any choice in it. She knew that the Vreth Empire was a historical term now, and that the Ninth Fleet was wreckage in a corridor named after a civilization that had tried to warn everyone and been ignored. She knew what she had done, and she knew why she had done it, and she held both those things in her hands every time she came here, like stones, testing their weight, trying to decide if they balanced. They didn't balance. They never balanced. That was the thing nobody told you about closing an account completely. The balance sheet was always wrong at the end. Far away, on the edge of the spiral arm, two beacons pulsed in the dark, on a frequency nobody used anymore. Patient. Still broadcasting. Nobody left out there to ignore them.